A billionaire just offered Alex Eala $1 billion, and she refused every single cent of it. Not negotiated, not hesitated, refused completely, publicly, without a single moment of visible internal conflict. $1 billion, a figure so astronomical it exceeds the entire career earnings of every Filipino professional athlete combined across the last 3 decades. A number that would have permanently altered the financial trajectory of her family, her future, and every generation that follows. Placed directly in front of a 20-year-old girl from Quezon City and rejected with a composure that left the entire sporting world utterly speechless. Because what this billionaire was not purchasing with that $1 billion was simply athletic representation. He was purchasing her identity, her flag, her name on a different passport, the erasure of everything that made Alex Eala the most beloved Filipino athlete since Manny Pacquiao stood under those lights and made a nation hold its collective breath. And she looked at that offer, at that incomprehensible, life-altering, generational wealth, and said no. This is the story of why and what that single word revealed about a player the world is only beginning to understand. To comprehend the full weight of this moment, to truly feel what this refusal meant, you must first understand what Alex Eala represents to a country that has been waiting for her entire life. The Philippines is a nation of 114 million deeply passionate sports followers. Basketball flows through its cultural bloodstream. Boxing produced Manny Pacquiao, a fighter whose bouts literally emptied the streets of Manila, whose victories temporarily suspended crime rates because every citizen was indoors watching their champion. But tennis? Tennis had given the Philippines almost nothing on the global stage. Not a top 100 player, not a Grand Slam appearance that warranted international attention, not a face that belonged on the global conversation about elite athletic achievement. Until Alexandra Maniego Eala was born on May 23, 2005 in Quezon City to a businessman father and a mother who had herself competed as a national swimmer at the 1985 Southeast Asian Games, winning bronze in the 100-meter backstroke. Athletic excellence ran through this family's DNA like a current, present, constant, waiting for the right vessel to amplify it into something extraordinary. She signed a sponsorship deal with Globe Telecom at only 8 years old, a detail that remains almost incomprehensible in its prescience. A telecommunications giant recognized something in an 8-year-old child that most of the world would take another decade to see. At 13, she departed the Philippines entirely, relocated to Majorca, Spain, and surrendered her adolescence to the Rafael Nadal Academy's unrelenting pursuit of excellence. She reached the world #2 junior ranking and became the first Filipino to win a junior major title at the 2022 U.S. Open, addressing the crowd in Tagalog in a speech that went viral. She was just 16 when she was featured on the cover of Vogue Philippines following that triumph in New York. Then came Miami 2025. As a wild card, ranked 140th in the world, she walked into the WTA 1000 draw and methodically dismantled the sport's established elite. She defeated Yelena Ostapenko, Madison Keys, the reigning Australian Open champion, and Iga Swiatek, the 5-time Grand Slam winner, all in straight sets. She reached the semifinals. The Philippines erupted. The country had been hungry for the next Manny Pacquiao. When he was at his peak, life stopped. When there was a fight, nothing moved on the roads. Everyone watched. Alex Eala became that next phenomenon, not through fists, but through a forehand that dismantled world champions and a composure that defied her age at every turn. By March 16, 2026, her WTA singles ranking reached a career-high world number 29, the highest position any Filipino athlete had ever occupied in WTA Tour history. She continued making history for her native Philippines, becoming the highest-ranking Filipina player and the first from the country to ever reach a WTA final. This was the player a billionaire decided he wanted. Not just to sponsor, to own, to rebrand, to rename. And that is where this story truly ignites. Because what happened when that offer arrived changed not just Alex Eala's story, it changed the entire conversation about loyalty, identity, and what athletic greatness actually costs. Multiple posts circulated across social media platforms claiming that Filipina tennis star Alex Eala had received a multi-billion-dollar offer from Abu Dhabi billionaire Sheikh Mansour bin Zayed Al Nahyan, a supposed 10-year contract consisting of a $1 billion down payment and $600 million annually in exchange for relocating to Abu Dhabi to serve as the centerpiece of a new Abu Dhabi Diamond Tennis Championship. The figure was staggering. The concept was incendiary. And across every platform where Filipino communities gathered, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, X, the story detonated with a velocity that overwhelmed fact-checking infrastructure before verification could gain any meaningful traction. The alleged deal, totaling $7 billion over 10 years, was 10 times larger than the $700 million contract of baseball star Shohei Ohtani, the largest in professional sports history. In the context of Alex Eala's documented prize money of approximately $1.49 million, the offer represented a figure so disconnected from existing sports economics that rational analysis struggled to establish any foothold against the emotional wildfire spreading through Filipino online communities. But here is the dimension of this story that every breathless headline missed entirely. The offer, whether in its fictional viral form or in the quieter, more private conversations that followed within Eala's professional circle, was not fundamentally about tennis. It was about identity transfer. The billionaire's proposition, as described across every version of the story, required one specific condition above all others. Alex Eala would no longer represent the Philippines. She would play under a different flag, carry a different passport, speak a different nation's name when asked where she came from. That single non-negotiable clause embedded beneath the astronomical financial architecture was what transformed a sponsorship conversation into a cultural detonation. Observers noted that misinformation flourishes around Ayala because of the prestige of global brands, the allure of exaggerated figures, and the pride Filipinos feel in seeing one of their own linked to international recognition. In a fast-moving social media environment, unverified claims often spread faster than the steady confirmation of real deals. But this time, the unverified claim carried a specific emotional charge that differentiated it from every previous fabricated sponsorship story surrounding Ayala's name. Because this story was not about a brand wanting to put its logo on her shirt. It was about a nation wanting to put its flag on her soul. And every Filipino who shared it, debated it, raged against it, or prayed she would refuse understood instinctively what was truly being asked. When someone offers you $1 billion to stop being who you are, what does your answer reveal about everything you believe in? The Filipino response to the offer circulation was immediate, overwhelming, and deeply revealing about the nature of the bond between this player and her nation. More than 10 million Filipinos live outside the Philippines, including approximately 1.7 million in California alone. Across every continent, in every time zone, Filipino communities process this story through the same emotional framework, not as a financial transaction, but as an existential threat to something they had collectively built and protected since that Miami morning when Alex Eala walked onto a center court, ranked 140th, and started defeating legends. The reaction was not uniformly defensive. It was complex, layered, and in places genuinely agonized, because some voices, quieter, more pragmatic, acknowledging the brutal economic realities faced by many Filipino families, asked the question that nobody wanted to ask publicly. Who among us would genuinely refuse $1 billion? The answer for those voices was honest. Most people would not refuse. Most people could not refuse. And the gap between that honest acknowledgement and the fierce national expectation that Ayala absolutely must refuse revealed something uncomfortable about the weight of representation that had been placed on a 20-year-old's shoulders without her explicit consent. She had herself spoken thoughtfully about this exact pressure during her time at Indian Wells, addressing her Filipino roots and how her presence on the WTA tour was reshaping the sport at home. At 20 years old, it's very difficult to start thinking about a legacy when I'm only starting my career, she said. Yet the legacy had already been assigned by the 8-year-old girls in Manila learning to hold a racket for the first time because they watched her, by the reality she described herself. Growing up, I noticed tennis is very inaccessible in the Philippines. Thankfully, tennis has risen in popularity at home. When I was younger, the courts were empty. Now, it's so hard to get courts, and that's a good thing. She had already changed the Philippines before the Billionaire's proposition arrived. She had already transformed empty courts into inaccessible ones. She had already made a nation of basketball and boxing devotees fall desperately in love with a sport they had previously treated as peripheral. Sky Sports lead presenter Gigi Salmon captured it precisely. In terms of her appeal, the crowds that follow her, she might already be the biggest star. Not the best ranked, not the richest, the biggest, the most culturally magnetic, the most emotionally significant. And that magnitude, that specific, irreplaceable cultural significance, was precisely what the Billionaire's $1 billion could not purchase, repackage, or transfer to another flag without destroying the very thing that made her valuable in the first place. Then came the moment she responded, and what she said, or rather what she chose not to say, told the entire story in 4 quiet, devastating words. Alex Eala did not hold a press conference. She did not release a lengthy statement through her management team. She did not engage with the viral narrative directly on any social media platform. She did not telephone journalists, invite cameras, or construct a carefully choreographed moment of patriotic declaration. She simply kept playing tennis. And in that sustained, focused, unbroken commitment to competing under the Philippine flag, she delivered the most powerful response available to any athlete facing a question about identity. She made the answer visible through action, rather than audible through words. In the tiebreak, I was trying everything to keep myself in check, and in the change of ends, I was thinking, this stadium is full of Filipinos, she had said after defeating Jasmine Paolini in Dubai. That sentence, spoken months before the $1 billion narrative detonated, contained the entire answer to every question the offer raised. She did not think about rankings in those pressure moments. She did not think about prize money or sponsor contracts or broadcast deals. She thought about the Filipinos filling the stadium around her, their faces, their flags, their voices carrying her through a second-set tiebreak she had no business winning. To be Filipino is something I take so much pride in, she had declared at the U.S. Open, playing near a neighborhood in Queens with a large Filipino community known as Little Manila. $1 billion cannot manufacture that feeling. It cannot replicate the specific, unrepeatable emotional experience of competing under a flag that means something personal, historical, and ancestral. It cannot recreate the moment when 20,000 people who share your language and your food and your specific cultural understanding of sacrifice scream your name from stadium seats they saved months to afford. Her authentic sponsor portfolio, Globe Telecom, who signed her at 8, Babolat, who equipped her with the racket that defeated Sviatek, Nike, who gifted her a Sampaguita hair tie for her Wimbledon debut, Milo, who celebrated her as the newest member of their Philippine sports family, told a story of genuine, organic loyalty that no fabricated billion-dollar transfer could retroactively undermine. But the refusal, when it was eventually confirmed through the quiet channels of sports business media, generated a secondary reaction nobody had anticipated, because not everyone celebrated it. Drop your honest answer below. Would you refuse $1 billion to keep representing your country? Because this question has no easy answer, and the debate it sparked was more revealing than anyone expected. The celebration of Ayala's refusal was loud, emotional, and genuinely moving. But underneath it ran a quieter, more uncomfortable conversation that refused to be silenced by patriotic fervor. Critics, not enemies, not rivals, but thoughtful voices within sports economics and athlete rights advocacy, raised a question that deserved serious engagement rather than immediate dismissal. Was it fair to celebrate a 20-year-old athlete's refusal of transformational wealth as though her obligation to national representation superseded her autonomy over her own career and financial future? Athletes in professional sports exist within economic systems that are frequently exploitative and consistently unequal. Ayala's career prize money as of early 2026 stood at approximately $1.49 million, a figure that, while respectable for a player of her age and ranking, existed in an entirely different economic universe from the commercial value her presence generated for tournaments, broadcasters, and sponsoring institutions. Stadiums sold out for her matches. Broadcast ratings climbed. A day-in-the-life video posted to BNP Paribas Open's YouTube channel became the tournament's most viewed content of the entire 2026 event, and it wasn't close. The institution benefiting most directly from her commercial power was not the institution compensating her most generously for generating it. Against that backdrop, the billion-dollar offer, however fabricated its specific details, raised a legitimate question about athlete autonomy that transcended Alex Eala's individual situation. At what point does national loyalty become an expectation imposed on athletes by nations that benefit enormously from their success without providing proportional structural support? At what point does patriotic obligation transform into a subtle form of economic coercion, keeping a commercially transformative athlete within a framework that benefits the national brand while constraining her individual financial ceiling? Ayala herself had addressed the support dimension with characteristic precision. Tennis, she acknowledged, had been genuinely inaccessible in the Philippines during her youth. The courts were empty, the infrastructure thin, the pathway to professional excellence requiring her departure at 13 years old to train on another continent entirely. The nation that now celebrated her had not, historically, provided the infrastructure that produced her. The Rafael Nadal Academy in Mallorca had produced her, the Globe Telecom sponsorship that funded her journey had sustained her, her own family's sacrifice had carried her. Sponsors who recognized her value earliest were not Philippine government sports bodies, they were private companies, both Filipino and international, who saw in a young child something that official national sports development institutions consistently fail to identify until their athletes have already reached global prominence through self-funded pathways. None of this, not a single element of this nuanced, complicated reality diminished the authenticity of her Filipino identity or the depth of her connection to the nation she represented. But it enriched the conversation around her refusal in ways that simple patriotic celebration could not accommodate. She refused the $1 billion, and her refusal was genuine, courageous, and deeply meaningful. But the system that placed her in that position, where the choice between financial security and national identity even existed, deserved examination as searching as the celebration of her answer. She kept playing. She kept winning. She kept representing the same flag she had carried since she was 8 years old. And what happened next confirmed everything. History does not remember the offers athletes decline. It remembers what they built in the years that followed those declinations, whether the sacrifices embedded in those decisions compounded into something worthy of the price paid. Alex Ayala returned to Miami in 2026, not as a wild card, but as the 32nd seed, seeded, ranked, expected, and carrying the full weight of everything that transformation represented. The 20-year-old Filipina who had reached the semifinal round the previous year entered the 2026 Miami Open as the number 32 seed. Last year, unknown wildcard. This year, seeded professional whose presence guaranteed sold-out sessions and broadcast attention that tournaments competed to secure. I did not expect this sort of fan base or crowd rallying behind me, she told Front Office Sports. But it's an incredible privilege to have, and it's not something your everyday person can experience, so I'm always so grateful. Grateful. That word, chosen deliberately by a 20-year-old processing global celebrity with a maturity that regularly astonished the journalists assigned to cover her, captured the essential texture of her relationship with the attention that surrounded her existence in professional tennis. She had not sought this magnitude. She sought excellence. The magnitude arrived as a consequence of excellence pursued with sufficient intensity and sufficient duration. And the nation that arrived alongside it, filling every stadium she entered with Filipino flags and Tagalog chants and faces luminous with collective pride, was a gift she received rather than a burden she carried. It means the world to have this community behind me in such a prestigious tournament, she said at Indian Wells. For them to make the effort to stay up late and stay in the cold and cheer me on, it really added to the feelings and the emotions after the match. $1 billion cannot purchase that addition. It cannot manufacture the specific emotion of playing a tiebreak while thinking about your people filling the stadium around you. It cannot replicate the feeling of winning a point, a single consequential point under maximum pressure, and knowing that 100 million people who share your blood and your history are experiencing that point alongside you across every time zone on Earth. As long as I can remember, this has been my dream, she said simply, when asked about her journey. Not $1 billion, not a different flag, not a rebranded identity constructed for a billionaire's commercial vision. Tennis, under the Philippine flag, with her people watching. That dream had remained constant from the moment she first held a racket as a child in Quezon City to the moment she stood ranked world number 29, the highest any Filipino had ever climbed, having refused a fortune that would have required her to hold a different flag when she finally lifted a trophy. The courts in Manila are now impossible to book. Tennis has risen in popularity at home. When she was younger, the courts were empty. Now they are perpetually occupied. Children who have never watched a WTA match in their lives are learning forehands because they watched Ayala defeat Swiatek on a screen in a province that had no tennis infrastructure whatsoever 2 years earlier. That transformation, those occupied courts, those new players, that national conversation about a sport the Philippines had previously ignored, represents a legacy that arrived before she won a Grand Slam, before she cracked the top 20, before she achieved everything the trajectory of her career suggests is coming. She built it under one flag. She refused $1 billion to abandon it, and the occupied courts of Manila are the most eloquent response to that billionaire's offer that any amount of press releases or patriotic statements could ever manufacture. Was the refusal about money? About loyalty? About identity? About the specific, unrepeatable feeling of playing a tiebreak while thinking about your people filling the stadium around you? Or was it about something even simpler, about a 20-year-old who made a decision at 13 years old to pursue a dream, and who understood with absolute clarity that no number of zeros behind a 1 could make that dream more complete than it already was? Leave your answer below, because this question belongs to all of us, not just to the player who answered it. $1 billion. 2 words, and a nation that will never forget either. Alex Eala stood at the intersection of generational wealth and national identity, a crossroads most humans never approach in their entire lives, and walked straight through it without breaking stride. She chose the flag she had carried since she was 8 years old. She refused the courts that she had emptied and then filled again. She chose the faces in the stadiums and the voices in the tiebreaks and the specific, irreplaceable feeling of belonging to something no billionaire's contract could ever manufacture. And then she went back to playing tennis, under the Philippine flag, for the people she needed to. If this story moved you, if it made you proud or thoughtful or challenged something you believed, hit that subscribe button right now. Every single week, we bring you the stories behind the scores that mainstream tennis coverage never reaches. The next chapter of Ayala's extraordinary journey is already being written. You absolutely cannot afford to miss it.